Hello, this is Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. Welcome to this, the recording of our program on March 22nd, 2024. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming today. My script says on this sunny morning, but obviously it didn't pay attention to what I wanted. But in any event, thank you very much for coming today. There are a number of board members, Civil War Study Group board members here besides myself. Can you stand so that we can, well, okay, there, and here, and myself and our Vice President, Jack Finn, who was nominated for Vice Presidency on one time when he was traveling and he wasn't present. Good luck with that. But anyway, these are the people, including myself, that you should either approach or email if you have any ideas for speakers. As a matter of fact, our speaker today was recommended by someone who apparently maybe heard you talk before. So, so that's good news, right? Sure. And, but in any event, out of trouble. That's right. Yes. So I'd like to, one thing, we do have a sign-up clipboard over here near the coffee urn. And by the way, the setup here, don't get any ideas. We're not serving you food. This is set up, regrettably, for a commemoration of life event at 3 o'clock this afternoon. But in any event, there's a sign-up sheet. If you think we do not have your current email address, or else you want to add yourself to our email list, please fill out the form. I appreciate that. I'd like to update you on the challenge grant that we received towards our history education projects. I guess what I said last month really took root because, or what we said last month really took root because we have surpassed our, it's more than a match. So thank you very much for all of those who have contributed, made generous contributions. If your check's in the mail, we're going to cash it anyway, thank you. And if you still want to give towards this part of our program, please do. We will not turn your money away. I appreciate it. Now, we do have our judging for the history project for the fourth graders. Jill and Deke Eigelhart on our board have been putting this together, and we have a nice team of judges, and so we'll be able to send out some pictures probably at the middle of May of an event that we'll hold here for the fourth grade students who have earned blue ribbons for their projects based upon our judging. It's a fun experience. I've been a judge before. I'm going to be a judge this year. One of the great memories is this one poster that was about James Madison, and it said that James Madison went to James Madison University. So anyway, so I think that's all the announcements. Pardon moi. Our meeting next month will be here as usual, and our speaker will be none other than John Hennessy, who in retirement is doing all sorts of history. Who knew? A historian that still does history in retirement. Gene. But anyway, his topic will be Aftermath Fredericksburg. His presentation will look at the monumental task of caring for the wounded and dead after the Battle of Fredericksburg, the realities of being wounded and treated in makeshift hospitals in town, the ordeal of medical personnel, the evacuation of the wounded, and generally the state of medical care in the Union Army by late 1862. So if you can, that by the way is on April 19th, I didn't say that, did I? And the reason that it's, usually our presentations are the fourth Friday of the month. This time it's earlier in the month because our May dinner will be on May 3rd. So, you know, we didn't want to give you too much in a short period of time. So give you at least 2 weeks between those events. So our speaker today is Gene Schmiel, Dr. Gene Schmiel. His topic will be Civil War Trailblazers and Troublemakers. Now, that's only one of the books up here. I can't remember which one it was, but you'll see it up there. Top. Oh, yes, of course. Top left. But here are a lot of the other books that he has written, and he has some over here that he will gladly sell you after the presentation, and for an extra $10 autograph. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure the autograph comes with the book price. But at any rate, Gene Schmiel is a retired U.S. Department of State Foreign Service officer who also was an assistant professor of history at St. Francis University, which is in Pennsylvania. He holds a PhD in history from Ohio State University. Gene has written over 20 books, and so obviously these are not all of the books he's written, about the Civil War. His first, Citizen General Jacob Dolson Cox and the Civil War Era, was published in 2014 by Ohio University Press, and that is one of the books over here. A companion book, My Dearest Lila, Civil War Letters Home by General Jacob D. Cox, was published in late 2023 by the University of Tennessee Press. Now, we don't know why he's, there's the University of Tennessee graduate. We don't know why he's state hopping, but at any rate. He co-authored with Frank Simone Jr. the first and only biography of General Irvin McDowell, Searching for Irvin McDowell, the Civil War's Forgotten General, book also over here. Gene is a native Ohioan, as you might have guessed, and he lives in Gainesville, Virginia, on the border of the Manassas battlefields. So, with no further point on my, I'll turn it over to Gene.
So I'll put this here. Normally I don't need a mic. One of the other wonderful things I've done in retirement is become an actor. Any of you have been to the Fauquier Community Theater? Not that far away. Okay, you gotta go. Well, last year I was in Miracle on 34th Street. I played the villain. I was a psychologist. Sent Santa Claus to the asylum, where he belonged. And earlier last year I was in Our Town, one of the most great, wonderful American plays. I had 3 roles. I was the policeman, the professor, and the undertaker. So, anyway, great to be here. I've never been here before. Can you hear me all right? Is the mic working, or is it just me, or is it both? Just me? Well, I thought it was both. Okay, all right. Well, okay, well, yeah, thank you for the nice welcome. Yes, I spoke at the Randy Station a few months back, and some of you folks perhaps were there. And despite that, you said I should come here to speak also. So but that's what, I'm always looking for opportunities to speak. What I'm going to talk about today about an idea that I had early on, that I'm going to create a series of books, Civil War personalities, 50 at a time. And I'm looking for themes. And you know what? Trailblazers and Troublemakers. It's a nice sound. And then I wrote Rogues, Rascals, and Rapscallions. And then I wrote Political Generals. And then I wrote Civil War Women, Underestimated and Indispensable. Right, ladies? Yeah. You're here. And all these others and several more. While also doing, yeah, these are self-published. Jeff Bezos of Amazon.com was nice enough to let me do this, and I really appreciate it. But I've also, as I said, done scholarly books, biographies and stuff. So, We're going to talk about some of these trailblazers, so it's not a consistent theme, but it's about different people that you may or may not have ever heard of, but you should have. And one of the things I've done in the book, have a picture of each person, a 2-page summary of their life, and then further reading. So if you want to read about them, here's a couple of books about each of these people. So, and at the end of the talk, at the end of each piece here, I want you to be able to say, I didn't know that, but you do now. So let's start with someone you may have heard of, Abraham Lincoln, and all the things. I mean, there's the three people about whom more books have been written. Number 1 is Jesus. Number 2, Abraham Lincoln. Number 3, Napoleon Bonaparte. Who knew? There's a piece of trivia. Next time we have a trivia competition. Anyway, one of the things I would talk about Lincoln is that he was, in my estimation, the best political general of the North. Now, when the war started, the United States Army had 19,000 men. When the war ended, 3 million men had come under arms. 2 million for the United States Army, 1 million for the Confederate Army. You had to create an entire substructure, everything about an army, which they really didn't have. This fellow, no military background, no experience, who was considered a country bumpkin. All of his cabinet members thought, well, Lincoln's just I'm going to control the administration. Each and every one of them said that. A wonderful book written by Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals. Lincoln fooled them all. And he fooled his generals because he had a firm grasp of strategy. He understood what was involved in winning wars. He understood that the objective was not the capital, but the army. More than once, he lectured George McClellan about where you are, you're closer to Richmond than Robert E. Lee is. What are you waiting for? And believe it or not, George McClellan always had an excuse. Always had an excuse. But anyway, Lincoln dominated decision. This is the final conference in months before, just early 1865. You have Lincoln in the middle. You have Sherman, Grant, and David Dixon Porter, the admiral. Lincoln's in the middle. He's the decision maker. Every one of these experienced military men understood by that point, this man knows what he's talking about. Lincoln became a great military leader during the Civil War. All right, so him you know. You may know this fellow too, Matthew Brady. Matthew Brady was a photographer up in New York. He had a very good business, and he said, when the battles were going on, I'm going to go down and send my men to take pictures of the battlefield. And his New York studio, he exhibited photos from the battlefield at Antietam. So this is in late 1862. And for the first time, the war was brought home to people. War was not something quick and easy. The war was not going to be over in 5 or 10 days. It was vicious, it was brutal, it was terrible, and obviously the people whose relatives had suffered and died knew more about it, but his photos on the Library of Congress website, a boon to me because there's tens of thousands of them that I can use in my books without having to pay royalties to anybody, but they were a wonderful, wonderful way to look at the war. But anyway, Matthew Brady brought the war home to people. And these are some examples of the photos that the people in New York came to look at the reality of war. Now, unfortunately, sometimes Brady would stage things. He would have take this body and put it over there and put it over here. He didn't have to do that, but he did. So there was Matthew Brady was not perfect, but he brought home the reality. And what's interesting that after the war, This is an enterprising guy. After the war, he went down to Richmond, and he said, well, this is Lincoln meeting with McClellan. He went down to Richmond and knocked on General Lee's door and said, excuse me, General, would you mind if I took a couple of pictures of you? This is Lee, April 1865, after the end of the war, with his son and with one of his aides. It's a wonderful slice of life that perhaps nobody but Matthew Brady could get anyone to agree to that, but there it is. And again, wonderful shot here, Lincoln discussing after the Battle of Antietam with McClellan. All right, Thaddeus Lowe. Now there's the guy, up in the air. This is one of the great examples of missed opportunities. Thaddeus Lowe came to the White House early in the war and said to Mr. Lincoln, I have a balloon, and I can go up, and I can be up several hundred feet up, and we can observe the enemy. And I can immediately transmit a report. He got a telegraph wire, took it with him, all the way up, sent a message to the White House. Here's what I see. Instant. This is a incredible transformation. So, but this title, unfortunately, is about the contribution of Thaddeus Lowe. The military establishment essentially said, too newfangled. What's difficult, I mean, to pump up the balloons, to get them in position, who have winds and the others shooting at them. Many generals did not like the idea. An incredibly lost opportunity. They worked extremely well when they worked. Now, did they deflate quickly? Did they not inflate at all sometimes? Were they incapable of going up? Yes. But broadly speaking, either side could have won many more victories more easily if they had the observation capability of these balloons. Thaddeus Lowe. Gone. All right. Patrick Cleburne. Well, we just celebrated St. Patrick's Day. Several 100,000 immigrants fought in the Civil War. 200,000 Germans on the Union side, about 10,000 Germans on the Confederate side. Patrick Cleburne was an immigrant from Ireland, but of course he had fought in the British Army because Ireland was part of the British Empire. And he was the Stonewall of the West. He had moved to Arkansas, he joined the Confederate forces, he was one of the great leaders, cavalry and others, of the West. He didn't get high promotions because he was a foreigner. He didn't go to West Point. But he had one very radical idea. In 1864, he gathered other generals from the Army of the Tennessee and said, we got a problem. The North is arming black men. Tens of thousands of black men are going to be soldiers, or if they're not soldiers, they'll be doing things that soldiers were doing. That many more soldiers can fight against us. We have tens of thousands of black men. We need to arm them and promise them freedom if they fight for the Confederacy. And all the other generals were aghast by this, because this undermines the very nature of Southern society. So they all voted against it. He sent the proposal to Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis found it, read it, put it in a drawer. It was not found until 1881. And it's in the official records. March 1865, the Confederate Parliament, Confederate legislature voted to arm black men for the Confederacy. But of course, March 1865, too late. But Cleburne, there he is at the Battle of Franklin, where he died leading his troops. He was one of the great leaders, the Stonewall of the West. But it didn't happen. Who's ever heard of stand waiting? One person. Two of them. Okay. Whoa, there we go. Right, pull back. Too many gestures. Stand Watie. Stand Watie was a Cherokee chief in Oklahoma. He was a slave owner, a very wealthy slave owner. And when the war started in the Oklahoma Territory, he said, well, if the Union wins, all my investment in slaves will disappear. I'm going to side with the Confederacy. He was the only Confederate general who was an Indian. The Union had one Indian general, Eli Parker. Eli Parker was a member of Grant's staff. Anyway, Stand Watie was the last Confederate commander to surrender. He surrendered in late June. Communications was a little slow. His was the last army to surrender. And after the war, he went back, lost all his land, lost all his slaves, obviously, but he was still a chief in the Cherokee Nation, so he was one of those, a chief person in the chief negotiating post-war treaties for the Cherokee. Yes, ma'am, you have a question?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, it was not Oklahoma Territory. Oklahoma became a state. Oh, wait a minute, it was.
It was.
Because Oklahoma didn't become a state until 1907.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And in 1995, Stand Watie got a stamp in his honor. There he is. Harriet Tubman. Everybody's heard of Harriet Tubman, the most famous woman from the Civil War. Someday she'll be on a $20 bill. Maybe. That's been talked about a lot. Anyway, I think you all know the story of Harriet Tubman. She was, fortunately, if that's the right term, enslaved in northern Maryland. So escaping, she didn't have to go that far to get to Pennsylvania, to freedom. If she were in southern Alabama, much different situation. But she went to the north, came back, brought her friend. She became the Moses. She helped form elements of the Underground Railroad. An inspiration to everybody during the Civil War. And down in South Carolina, she led a Union force, kind of the advanced scout, to take a Confederate encampment where some slaves were being held and freed them. So she was a military leader too. Yeah. So anyway, obviously one of the greatest and best known women from the Civil War. And these are two facilities in Maryland dedicated to the memory of Harriet Tubman. George Sharp. Okay, who's heard of George Sharp?
I've seen him.
These are the people who worked in the CIA. I'm not supposed to say that? That's okay. Who's George Sharp? Well, George Sharp was a New York lawyer. He was working on his staff. And Joe Hooker, when Joe Hooker took over the forces, not that far from here, after Ambrose Burnside was fired, Hooker said, I don't really know what the heck's going on. I don't have very good intelligence about the Confederate, where they are, what they're doing, what's the size of the army. And so he asked around, and they said, you know, George Sharp, he's a pretty capable guy. He's never done any of this stuff before. George Sharp created a systematic network of spies and cryptology and everything just out of whole cloth in 1863. And this was fascinating. And the history of the Central Intelligence Agency says, quote, his structured approach was not reinstitutionalized until 1947 when the CIA was created. George Sharp's ideas were the foundation of the ideas for the CIA. And he created it on his own. A brilliant man. Again, you didn't know that. Never heard of it. If you want to hear about it, here's a book. Here's a book about it. Major General George Sharp and the creation of American military intelligence in the Civil War. Lew Wallace. Some of you have heard of Lew. Some of you read his book, Ben-Hur. Yeah, well, Lew Wallace was from Indiana. Lew Wallace was a political general. He signed up, rose to most of the ranks, and but was a very obstreperous fellow. He liked to argue with everybody, including his superiors, and questioning their orders. That does not get you promoted, not too often. But anyway, at the Battle of Shiloh, Ulysses Grant thought that Lew Wallace had not supported him very well, and Lew Wallace was essentially shunted to the side and never ever again given a senior assignment. In retirement, he decided to write a book about the Christ entitled Ben-Hur. And today, Lew Wallace has a statue in Statuary Hall in Congress. Each state, and this was something that was created during the Civil War, each state was to be honored with two people with statues in Congress. That's one of my books, the Civil War Statuary Hall. Lew Wallace was the one of those from Indiana. Robert E. Lee used to be one of those from Virginia. He was removed at 3 o'clock in the morning, December 21st, 2022, and is being replaced by Barbara Johns. Barbara Johns was a high school student who protested against school segregation in Virginia. George Washington is the other person from Virginia. The process of who's going to be in there, who's not, continued. Jefferson Davis remains today, as does Alexander Stephens in Statuary Hall. The President and the Vice President of the Confederacy are honored in the Congress. Montgomery Meigs. Montgomery Meigs, his parallel is George Marshall. George Marshall became a 5-star general. How many battles did George Marshall participate in World War II? 0. He was in Washington. Roosevelt said, I don't want you there, I want you here. How many battles did Montgomery Meigs engage in the Civil War? 0. How many lives did Montgomery Meigs save and ensure? Many, many thousands. Because he was the quartermaster general. He made sure they had enough shoes, bullets, food, you name it, transportation, etc., to make sure the war got implemented well. He's the one, because his son, who was a graduate of West Point, his son was killed in the war. Montgomery Meigs, looking out the back window of the White House, said, I see a wonderful place for a cemetery for our dead. Mrs. Lee's house. Remember, that was Mrs. Lee's house at Arlington Hall. Mr. Lee was a boarder. Mrs. Lee owned that house. That's where Arlington Cemetery was created by Montgomery Meigs. And he designed the pension building. Anyone been in Washington? The pension building downtown? Up here, you can see over the doorway, soldiers. Pension building. The clerks worked up here around the top. Everything else was just, I mean, this is about, I'd say, 40, 50 feet ceilings. Didn't have much air conditioning after the Civil War, so that was designed to keep things a bit cool. But Montgomery Meigs is one of the great unsung heroes of the Civil War for the North. Then we have Judson Kilpatrick. Judson Kilpatrick. I want to walk over there, and I got to get this thing off because I need to go get a book. How did I do that? Could you give me that, the last book over there? I'm sorry. The last, keep going, the last one. No, I'm sorry, not that one. I'm sorry. The one that, keep going. Now, that one. I had to prepare for this and I didn't. Okay. Judson Kilpatrick graduated from West Point just as the war was. Okay, what did I do? Okay. And he joined the Cavalry Corps. And late in the war, when Sherman decided who was he going to take for the march to the sea, he said, I want Kilpatrick to head up my cavalry. And they said, Kilpatrick? You know what kind of human being he is? Well, let me hear it. I will read you what Jacob Cox said. Jacob Cox is the person I wrote about. Here's what he said about Kilpatrick. His notorious immoralities and rapacity set so demoralizing an example to his troops that the best disciplinarians among his subordinates could only mitigate its influence. The value of his services made his commander willing to be ignorant of escapades which he could hardly condone. He was quite capable of daredevil recklessness that dismayed his opponents and imparted his own daring to his men. And as Sherman said, I know Kilpatrick's a hell of a damn fool, but I want that sort of man to command my cavalry. He was that kind of guy. His nickname was Kill Cavalry Kilpatrick. Why? Because he was reckless. He would attack, and a lot of his men, he not only killed enemy cavalry, but killed his own guy too. He was the one who led an effort to kidnap Jefferson Davis late in the war. And he was considered a great ladies' man. As the French would say, chacun à son goût. Each to his own taste. You tell me, ladies. That's a ladies' man. Okay. Jonathan Letterman. Now there's a very famous man. Jonathan Letterman, the father of battlefield medicine. He was the doctor for the Army of the Potomac. He instituted significant changes in how medicine was implemented in hospitals, in triage, in ambulance system, everything. He just took the entire system and created, again, like George Sharp. Although George Sharp had no background, Jonathan Letterman was a doctor. Efficient control, supply of supplies. I guess I got to change that. Modern field hospitals, everything. This is the most famous doctor to emerge from the Civil War, Jonathan Letterman. And that's just some picture. There are operations going on, men being carried in and back and forth. Okay, Thomas Nast. You all heard of Thomas Nast? German immigrant. Power of the pen and ink. He was the first and perhaps most influential political cartoonist. He skillfully skewered, he hated the Confederacy, and he skillfully skewered them in Harper's Weekly. He was really, he made Harper's Weekly a key source of Union support. Abraham Lincoln said Thomas Nast was his most efficient recruiting agent. More among the Germans than anyone else, but nevertheless, in general. And he invented Santa Claus. Well, at least the image of Santa Claus over there is one of them. And this is in one of his most famous drawings. It's the image of, here's the soldier writing a letter, thinking about home, and here's the home. Here are the children in bed, and the mother saying, I hope he will come home at the end of the war. It's one of the most powerful and Christmas Eve paintings. And this is Santa Claus talking to the troop. You can't see it, but he has a little doll, a little toy. The little toy is Jefferson Davis at the end of a noose. You have to look very carefully. Thomas Nast. Gabriel Raines. Now there's a guy. Look at that smile, huh? Don't cross this guy. This guy was in charge of the bomb squad of the Confederacy. He was good. He killed tens and hundreds of thousands of Union men. Landmines, sea mines, torpedo, you name it, Gabriel Raines was the guy. He was really good at his job. 2,000 of his mines detonated during the war. He developed the bomb for the White House. As you may or may not know, in April 1865, the plan was to get a bomb and blow up the White House and kill Lincoln that way. The plot was foiled, and instead John Wilkes Booth implemented Plan B, the assassination. But Raines was the fellow, the most efficient leader of the Confederate bomb squad. This is interesting. When Sherman was marching to the sea, he would come to minefields. And he said, you know, we needed to wait to find out where these mines are. Bring those prisoners over here.
Oh, jeez.
You're going to go out and find out where the mines are. Oh yeah? Oh, maybe we can find out ourselves. And they did. There was a lot of that. But Sherman threatened them with being the advance forces walking through fields, because bombs had been hidden all over the place. Again, for the first time in American history. And that's what this is about that event. Then we have Jacob Cox. Of course, I had to put this in here since in 1969, the Ohio State University gave me a PhD in history. Yeah, I'm that old. I was 6. I was a child prodigy. No, and my dissertation was a biography of Jacob Cox. Born in Montreal, Canada. His father was building the Cathedral of Montreal at that time. But anyway, moved to Ohio, Oberlin College, governor of Ohio, etc. And he was one of the best political generals. As I said, when the war started, 19,000 men. When the war ended, the United States Army had 2 million men. They had to create tens of thousands of positions, and there weren't enough West Pointers to fill them all. So there were thousands of men, like Jacob Cox, from private life, who became captains, majors, lieutenants, and generals. They were disparaged as political generals because they didn't have training. Well, at the end of the Civil War, William Tecumseh Sherman asked Jacob Cox to join the army as a brigadier general. He succeeded that well. Cox said, well, I'd like to be interested in that, but he was running for governor of Ohio at the time, which he won. Anyway, so Cox was one of the best, and he wrote several books, and his military reminiscences of the Civil War is, in my unbiased view, the best biography by a general. Even far better than Grant. Grant's memoirs are very, very biased. Very, very biased. Among other things, he did not even mention Jacob Cox. Jacob Cox was Secretary of the Interior under Grant. But anyway. And there's the book, and this is my new book, My Dearest Lil, his letters home to his wife. It was published by the University of Tennessee Press, because Ohio University Press isn't doing Civil War anymore. And Tennessee has a series called Voices of the Civil War. Memoirs, letters, etc. So thank you to the University of Tennessee Press for publishing that book. Anyway. Quantrill, William Quantrill. There's a guy. Any members of the Quantrill Society? No. The Quantrill Society meets every year in Kansas to celebrate the exploits of this mass murderer, vicious vigilante, human scum. William Quantrill, born and raised in Ohio, was a teacher, went out to Kansas and had a real transformation. He became a vicious, evil perpetrator of violence against the other side. Quantrill's raiders are bushwhackers, otherwise known as let's raid, kill all the men, take all the women, and burn everything. And in Lawrence, Kansas, they razed the city, burned it all down. Lawrence, Kansas was a known pro-union city. Quantrill decided the best solution for them was to burn down the whole city. So, again, today the Quantrill Society meets to celebrate this man. To each his own, right? Elizabeth Blackwell. These are very important. Anybody heard of Elizabeth Blackwell before? Okay, a few. the first woman in the United States to get a medical degree. Medical school was 2 years at the time. And as I understand it, many of them, you did the first year, the second year was a repeat of the first year to make sure you got it right. Very little practice. But she got a medical degree. When the war started, she went to Washington and said, we need to have a system where the private sector can support Washington with supplies and a whole lot, and it was her ideas which helped to create what was called the United States Sanitary Commission, a private group which funneled millions and millions of dollars of medical equipment, everything from bandages to crutches to stretcher, you name it. But she had one problem. She was not named to the leadership of the U.S. Sanitary Commission. Anyone want to guess what her problem was? He was a woman. How did you know? Women don't do this. And she said, yes, I do. No, you don't. She was not given a position. Afterwards, she went to England for a while, and back in the United States, she created medical schools only open to women in the United States. So she's one of the great, one of those women, underestimated and indispensable. And she got a stamp too. Look at that. 18-cent stamp. First woman physician. Remember Quantrill? It wasn't that long ago, was it? Here's two fellows in Tennessee who were just as bad. Old Champ Ferguson here, he liked the Confederacy. He led bands of bushwhackers and vandals who destroyed all kinds of things. And early in the war, he raided the farm of this fellow, Tinker Dave Beatty. Well, these are just farmers. And Tinker Dave did not take kindly to that. So he said, well, you know what, we got to get some pro-union vandals and bushwhackers and such. So during the war, these two went back and forth, essentially killing hundreds of people, laying waste here, there, and everywhere in Tennessee. More Civil War battles fought in Virginia. Tennessee was number 2. And Tennessee was very divided. And so these fellows were the two most famous bushwhackers, the Quantrills of Tennessee. Now, trivia. The end of the Civil War, 2 men were executed for treason. Champ Ferguson was one of them. You never heard of him. Who's the other one? Heard of the prison camp in Andersonville? Henry Wirtz. Henry Wirtz was the other one. Everyone knows Henry Wirtz in Andersonville. Champ Ferguson. About 6 months after the war, learned about what he had done. The army came, knocked on the door, took him prisoner, tried him, hanged him for treason. No. So now, you didn't know that. Now you do. Okay. People on the other side. People switching sides. These are two of the most famous, most influential Virginians who stayed in the United States Army. Scott, the General-in-Chief, he had been the General-in-Chief. he stayed in the Union. He was a Virginian. And George Thomas. George Thomas, when his family learned that he had stayed with the Union Army, took his picture on the wall, turned it around, and his family did not speak to him ever again because he had committed the crime of fighting and staying faithful to his oath. Okay. Then we have people on the other who went the other way. Roswell Ripley. Roswell Ripley's an Ohioan. He left the war. He left the army early on. He married a woman from Charleston, and he fought for the Confederacy. And there were a few people in the Confederate Army who said, we wish Roswell had stayed on the other side. He wasn't very good. He made a lot of mistakes. Then we got John Pemberton. Anyone know what battle he fought and lost? Vicksburg. John Pemberton, was the commander in Vicksburg who surrendered to Ulysses Grant. He was born and raised in Philadelphia, married a woman from Virginia, and women have influence, man. Can you believe that? So he sided with the Confederacy, and he was the commander in Vicksburg who surrendered. And of course, more than a few people in the South said, well, what do you expect from a Yankee? He obviously undercut everything and blah, blah. Anyway. After the war, he died and wanted to be buried in the family cemetery in Philadelphia. Philadelphians, led by someone named George Meade, fought against it. So Pemberton was buried in that cemetery over there. The family plot was over here. Bitterness continued. William Slade. Now, where's William Slade? Who's William Slade? Well, he was a freed colored man, as they said at the time. He was the chief usher at the White House for about 30 years. And he's Abraham Lincoln. Every now and then he had, William, come on here. Sit, let's talk. What do the colored people think? What do they want? What's going on out there? What's the feeling? And William Slade became an incredible source of useful information for Lincoln. He's the one that said to Lincoln, you've got to meet with this fellow named Frederick Douglass, who obviously was by far the most influential black man in the world. There was a trivia question we had once. After Abraham Lincoln, what man was photographed more out of the Civil War than anyone else? Frederick Douglass. He liked to get in front of a camera. Anyway, so Slade was one of those who helped to persuade Lincoln about arming black troops, bringing in and showing, telling him, I'm meeting with a black man in my office. Revolutionary at the time, but the kind of symbolism that Lincoln really understood. Okay. John Hay. Well, William Slade was the usher. John Hay, from Ohio, from Cleveland, yay! John Hay was 23 years old, living in Springfield, Illinois. And John Nicolay, a German immigrant, had been Lincoln's secretary. And Lincoln wins the election. He said, Nicolay, I want you to come to Washington, keep me my chief of staff, and bring someone else. Well, he was buddies with John Hay. The two of them became the White House staff. They're fighting an enormous war. Hay was 23, Nicolay was 29. These two kids are implementing the war. That's unbelievable. So Hay did a great job. He was the Secretary of State under William McKinley during the Spanish-American War. And he and Nicolay wrote a 10-volume biography of Lincoln, which is the basic fundamental source of information about it. They were there for 4 years. They lived and worked in the White House. They were there. And it's a wonderful book in case you want to read. Lincoln's Boys. Gosh, was he? And how these two young kids helped to run the war. Unbelievable. Katie Brownell. This is an interesting person. The estimate is that 400 women fought in the Civil War on the battlefield. 399 of them fought masquerading as men. Katie Brownell fought as a woman. The only one. Why people don't know this, I don't know. She and her husband joined a Rhode Island regiment under Ambrose Burnside. They were there at First Bull Run. She was a color bearer. Color bearer is a very dangerous position. It's out front. This way, boys. Yeah, and she survived. So she was someone who's, and she designed her own uniform, but then so did everybody else. I talk about Irvin at the first battle of Bull Run, how people had difficulty recognizing uniforms because there weren't any uniforms. People were wearing what they came with. There were probably 1,000 uniforms among 65,000 men. And so you really didn't know sometimes who the heck was out there. But anyway, Katie Brownell, someone you've got to remember. Then we got Clara Barton, obviously very important. She and Harriet Tubman, the most famous women from the Civil War. She said, I'm not a nurse. I provide supplies, I help out. After the war, she founded the Office of Missing Soldiers. Someone asked him about what do you do? She helped to find 2,000 men and bring them home to be buried. And that office is a museum in Frederick, Maryland today. And she also founded the American Red Cross. I have a little story about Katie Brownell. Remember Paul Harvey? The rest of the story? It's related to these three fellows. Any West Point graduates? Okay. West Point in 1818 began having class ranks, 1 through the end. You know, George Custer was the GOAT. He was the bottom. He was at the bottom of his class. All through time, today, West Point count the number of points within class at all time. So in all time, the 3 highest ranking officers. Number 3, Douglas MacArthur. Number 2, this is young Robert E. Lee. Number 1, Charles Mason. See? I didn't know that. Yeah, Charles Mason. Who the heck is Charles? Well, Lee was number 2 in his class in 1829. Charles Mason was number 1. Charles Mason was from Vermont. He resigned from the Army after 4 years, became a lawyer, went to the Iowa Territory, became a judge, and a patent attorney. There's a point to this story. 1850, what happened? Oh, I went too far. Oh my God, I really did do that, didn't I? Holy smokes. Okay. Better this way. He knew Franklin Pierce, been elected president. Pierce said, come to Washington, I want you to head up the patent office. Okay. Mason gets there, and for reasons I really don't understand why, he puts an ad in the newspaper. I want to hire clerks for the patent office, including women, at the same rate of pay and the same working conditions. That's radical. 1853. Clara Barton was a school teacher in New Jersey. A little tired of teaching. She's visiting friends in Washington, opens up the newspaper and said, wow, I'm tired of teaching. I think I'll try this. Goes down, interviews with Mason. He hires her on the spot. Clara Barton is a patent clerk in Washington, 1861, when the first incidents take place outside Baltimore. She gathers supplies to help them, igniting her entire career. Would not have happened except for the highest ranking graduate from West Point of all time, who you now know to be Charles Mason. That's the rest of the story. A wonderful little story. Who knew? Then we got the Civil War. Nursing became a female profession in the United States. This is Sister Anthony O'Connell, who was in Cincinnati. She was one of the many. In 1861, there were 25 hospitals training women to be nurses. 100% of them were nuns. The Catholic Church, Catholic hospitals training nuns to be nurses. No other women were being trained to be nurses. Was not done. The war starts. 650, an estimated 650 nuns became nurses on the battlefield, including Sister Anthony. Because of the Civil War, nursing, and the fact that the men looked around and said, you know what? We got to throw our prejudice in. We need these women. Incredible work that they did on the battlefield. So nursing becomes a female profession in the United States. I mean, until recently, it's what, 98%, maybe? Things are changing, I know. But. All right. Dan Sickles, hey, anyone know Dan Sickles? #1 troublemaker. Charles, am I going too far? I know, I've got 5 minutes left. Doing good? Okay. Dan Sickles. Dan Sickles was a political general. Dan Sickles was, he was a rapscallion. That's that wonderful. A rapscallion is a rascal squared. Dan had no morals. Dan, he married a woman who he knew when she was a child. He waited until she was 17 and then married her. He got a job from New York to go to work at the embassy in London. He left his wife at home and took his prostitute girlfriend to live with him in London. I was in the Foreign Service. We don't allow that anymore. Dan was that kind of guy. Dan comes back. Late in the 1850s, he of course has many girlfriends. He goes to see his wife every now and then. One day, he learns that his wife is engaging in a dalliance with the son of Francis Scott Key. Remember him? Yeah. And of course, Dan is enraged. What? Destroying the sanctity of marriage? Dan was one of the great hypocrites of all time. Dan stalks Mr. Key, shoots him in cold blood on Lafayette Square, opposite the White House. Dan gets a good set of lawyers, including Edwin Stanton, who would become Secretary of War during the Civil War for the Union. He gets off because it was a crime of passion. The fact that he waited hours to do it all didn't matter. He got away with it. He got away with it. So that's Dan. At Gettysburg, the line was set up. He was told what to do. Dan said, I knew better. I'm going to advance. Down to Devil's Den, although you know Gettysburg very well. And Dan went down and he advanced his troops so they had Confederates to his side and in front of him and everywhere else, and essentially got his men decimated, and his leg was shot off. It didn't matter. Dan had political ties. Dan went back to Washington and said it was George Meade's fault. I didn't understand his orders. He only told me 3 times what to do, but I knew better. Dan Sickles received the Medal of Honor. There is a Sickles Avenue at Gettysburg. I don't get it. This is the sleazeball of sleazeballs. But there we are. Life is not fair. There he is. There's Dan going forward when he was told not to. All right. Yeah, then we have here Jefferson Davis in blue. Did you know there were 2 Jefferson Davises in the Civil War? Yeah. This is Jefferson Davis, Union General. They were not related. Jefferson Davis joined the Army as a youth, moved up in the ranks. He was a very reckless fighter, a very tough fighter. Always liked to fight. He fought so well that at one time he got in an argument with his commanding officer and shot and killed him in public, in front of other people, and was not prosecuted. We need fighting men. He was never prosecuted. Killing his commanding officer in front of other people. Then, he's also well known for, on the Sherman's march to the sea, as Sherman marched, tens of thousands of enslaved people were leaving slavery and said, coming to the army. They're liberators. Sherman said, yeah, let us win the war, then you're going to be liberated, but I have to feed and take care of all these people. I have a war to fight. Well, it was a difficult situation. And at one point, they crossed some rivers, and Davis pulled up the pontoons, and tens of thousands of enslaved people coming afterwards. Some of them were in the water, some of them were coming. hundreds and hundreds of them drowned as a result of Jefferson Davis's decision. Again, not prosecuted for that either. So, Mary Walker. Everybody knows Mary Walker? She's going to have a fort here soon. Actually, she already does. Fort Mary Walker. It used to be Fort A.P. Hill. Mary Walker also had a medical degree. She worked as a nurse because they wouldn't let her be a surgeon. She finally got to be a surgeon under George Thomas. Remember George Thomas, the Virginian, out in the West? This was her uniform. She said, the surgeons have to wear trousers, so I'll wear trousers, but you insisted I have a skirt, so I'll put the skirt on top. She was one tough lady. One tough lady. And so she won the Medal of Honor at the end of the war. And around 1912, Congress started efforts to get back Medals of Honor from people who didn't deserve them. They didn't take it back from Dan Sickles, as they should have. But they came to Mary Walker and said, you don't deserve that Medal of Honor. You got to give it back. Now, what do you suppose Mary Walker said? Now, she was a lady. She said, hit the road, Jack. Hit the road, Jack. And this, I think, is interesting. There's a stamp, United States stamp, Mary Walker, Medal of Honor. Medal of Honor. So, those are people you may or may not heard of. Interesting parts of the Civil War. Interesting people, crazy people, dangerous people, trailblazers and troublemakers all. Thank you. And all of these people are in some of these books, and some of them are in 2 books and whatever. Oh, we got, let's see, I think the lady in the back. Did you have a question? No? Okay. Yes, gentlemen.
You mentioned the troublemakers. We had a troublemaker in my family. My great-grandfather was John Cornwell. And early in the Civil War, he was too old for police soldier, but he had some horses and a wagon. He did a Charlottesville where he put supplies up for the Confederate troops. His last trip, he brought a wagon with supplies to Mosby. Mosby did not pay him. So he went and got a Union Army, come down on Mosby. Mosby lost to them. We don't talk about it anymore.
People talk about Mosby a lot. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the pension building.
Yes.
Today it's known as the National Building Museum.
Right.
Which is an interesting place to visit.
Yes.
Not one of your first stops on your tour.
Yeah.
It has also served as a site for inaugural balls.
Right.
Over the years. Wonderful. Really
Yeah.
amazing inside.
Yes. That's the major league pillars in there. Yes. Okay. Did everybody hear that? It's now the National Building Museum, and inaugural balls have been in there, and it's a wonderful museum. It's not part of the Smithsonian. You have to pay admission these days, I think. I'm not sure. Other questions? Any other generic questions about the Civil War? About because I got all kinds of other things to talk. Come on, folks.
Hello.
John, you've got to have some questions. No, he had 6 questions he was going to ask you.
No, I can't think of anything. Thank you very much.
Okay, my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. What did I do? Okay, I have some books here for a mere $10, most of them. And the autograph is free. Or the autograph's $10 and the book is free. Either way.
Thanks very much, Gene. A very good presentation. I want to remind you about the sign-up sheet if you want to continue receiving our emails. And I also forgot to mention in detail about the annual dinner. It's May 3rd here. The details are on our website. It's a buffet dinner. There's a registration form that's available that you can download from, and also I sent it out to you in email, so if you may already have it. But thank you very much. Have
When do you
a-
see the time on that?
the time is 5:30 until about 9. 5:30 to 6:30 is well, the bar's open. and then at 6:30 we sit down, dinner, tables are called up to the buffet, and then at 7:15 or thereabouts, the speaker has to earn his supper. Okay?
Supper?
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you all.
Before you go, please remember to visit our website often, civilwarstudygroup.org. We make every attempt on a regular basis to provide informative content. Thank you for visiting, and God bless.